the outset, there's a question that leads us into our next avenue of exploration, you could say. And that question is, where are we when there is no longer a need to be here and now? No longer any need for constant effort to be present, focused, and attentive. There's an old story that points us in, you could say, the right direction. And it's that story about the seeker who was indeed a finder. We call him Rahim. But Rahim studied the ancient texts for some time before it came to his ears that there was a certain master sage who he was drawn to. So he made the arduous journey to find his way to the abode of this master and sage. And Rahim took up residence with the old sage and listened and carefully took in all his teachings, whilst also being attentive to the needs of the old man and his wife, who had gotten now on in age. But it so happened that even in this dotage, the old sage impregnated his old wife with a child. And it was in her 8th month that the old sage found that he had to go on a teaching odyssey, you could say. And he left his wife in the care of Rahim and a midwife who was to attend to the birth. Now, when the onset of the birth came on, Rahim took vigil outside the door of the chamber in which the wife was giving birth to her child, and waiting anxiously for the first cries of the infant, when suddenly an old man came up to the door and was about to burst in the door of the chamber in which the birth was taking place. And Rahim said, "Who are you, and what do you want to, why are you going in? You cannot go in there." But the old man stopped and said to Rahim, "Oh, I am the god Brahma, and it is my task to write the fate on the forehead of every child who is born. Please let me in, because the birth is imminent." Rahim said, "Please, well, tell me, what is going to be the fate of this child?" And Brahma said, "This is not known until it's actually written on the forehead. Please let me pass." Rahim said, "Well, please, will you tell me what the fate of this child is when you come out?" And so Brahma went into the birth room and with his stylus wrote on the forehead of the child. But when he was leaving, Rahim demanded, "Please tell me, what is the fate of this child?" And Brahma said, "He is going to live in poverty with only an oxen, a bullock, and a sack of rice." Well, when Rahim heard this, he was downhearted. How could it be that a child of this great sage, this great saint, could have such a fate as this? But there was nothing he could do. And when the old sage returned, Rahim kept his peace, recognizing deep within himself that this was destiny, this was karma, this was fate. over which he had no power, so he let it be. But after 2 years, the wife became pregnant again, at a time when the old sage was again called out on pilgrimage, and again Rahim was left waiting at the door, as again Brahma the god came with his stylus to write on the forehead of the child. So when this, of course, happened and Brahma came out, Rahim again asked him, what is the fate of this child? And Brahma said, she will live in poverty, she will become a prostitute. And so again, Rahim was devastated. How could this happen to a child of his great master? But again, accepting that this was fate, destiny, karma, he kept his peace. When the old sage returned, now when the children were 3 and 5 years old, Rahim decided that he must himself go on pilgrimage. So he left his beloved teacher, master and sage, and set off for Tibet. He was away for 20 years, during which time he met and learned from those great souls who found themselves in caves nestled in the Himalayas and others. But after 20 years he decided to return to where his master lived. But of course when he returned, he found that his old master and his wife had passed away. But he asked of those people around, those in the villages, where he could find the master's son. And he was pointed to a downtrodden area and a little hovel. And when he knocked on the door of this hovel, there was the son of his master with a wife and 2 underfed children, with their property only being 1 oxen and a sack of rice which, when it ran out with his meager earnings, he would buy another. Now Rahim asked the son, do you recognize me? But of course he was not recognized, and had to explain to the son that he was the student of his old father. And of course he was invited in. But then Rahim said to the son, please, I ask of you, tomorrow take your bullock, take your oxen to the market and sell it, and buy yourself your bag of rice. But when you do, you must not keep anything, not a grain of rice. Buy what you need to feed your family and share what there is to share, leaving nothing. Now the son was greatly unable to think that this could be done. How could he do this? For what would they live on when this was gone? But the son's wife spoke up and said, this man is the student of your father, the great sage. We must listen to what he tells us. So reluctantly, the son agreed to do what Rahim said. Now Rahim left that place, but he stayed nearby to watch what happened. And indeed, the son sold the bullock, the oxen, and bought the rice, bought food for his family, and shared the rest with the people around him, leaving nothing. And even though it was observed that Rahim, seeing the son, not sleeping that night, but finding the next morning that when he went to the barn, there was an oxen, a bullock there, also a bag of rice. Day after day, the same thing. A new oxen, a new bag of rice was present there. So Rahim went to the son and confirmed that now he was able to trust, you might say, and every day using up every last grain of rice, selling the oxen. But then Rahim asked the son, where was his sister? And the son, with tears in his eyes, said, I'm ashamed to state so, but in her poverty she has become the town prostitute in the village nearby. So Rahim hastened to this village, and the house where the sister lived was pointed out to him, and he went immediately and knocked on the door. And of course, as is the way with such beings, the door was opened immediately. But when Rahim asked the maiden, who am I? Do you know me? She was not able to recognize the student of her father. So again he explained to her who he was. And he said, will you do what it is I ask of you? And immediately, trusting the truth of what Rahim said, for some reason, he said to her, from now on, only answer the door to someone who is able to give you a string of pearls. And when you receive these pearls, sell them, and please do not keep anything for yourself. Share what it is that you receive. She readily agreed to this, and again Rahim stayed nearby to observe. And indeed, when there were knocks on her door from those who were her customers, she replied, you may only enter with a string of pearls. Now it so happened that along came a young and handsome man bearing a string of pearls, and the door was opened to him. He stayed for the night and then left, and so it followed that every day a string of pearls was bought by the same young man. No others were allowed to enter her doorway. Witnessing this, Rahim went on his way. But he stayed not too far away, and taking rest under a tree one night, ready to embark on another pilgrimage. He woke very, very early in the morning as the birds were beginning their songs, and before the sun had begun to rise, when he saw an old man coming down the road bearing a sack of rice on his head, leading an oxen, and with a string of pearls over his shoulders. So Rahim accosted this being, who immediately said to him, "Look at me, you wretched fellow. You see what you have done to me. My head is bald from carrying a sack of rice every day, and every day having to prepare myself become a handsome young man to deliver a string of pearls to a maiden every night." And Rahim replied to him, "Change the destiny of these young people and be freed from your own bondage." And so it happened. The son and the daughter of the great sage were released from the servitude, the enslavement of their fate. What does this story tell us? How does it lead us into an exploration and an answer to the question, where are we when there's no longer any need to be here and now, to have the constant, unrelenting effort to be present, focused, and attentive? What is this place, this state?